XDefiant is here, but only for a little bit of time, so I'd imagine you and I all want to do as best as we can in this short window of time that we have to play. So today, I want to share with you a handful of tips to help improve your game in XDefiant. It's a sweaty one in a lot of cases, so how can you manage as best as possible? Today, we're running down a handful of basic tips that can go a long way. By no means is it anything that's a definitive list of like, these are the only tips you should follow, so if you'd like to add something to this list, feel free to. We're all here looking for the same thing, to do better as players, so feel free to share your tips with the community. If you enjoy this video, you find it at all insightful, do me a favor and drop a like on it, and if you're new to the channel, consider subscribing to stay updated with all things XDefiant, Modern Warfare 2, and other FPS content here on the channel. I'd love to have you in the community. And finally, make sure to check out my friends over at G Fuel for 30% off certain items like hype sauce tubs and starter kits in the month of June, but more on them a little later. For now, let's jump into it. So first and foremost, one of the big things to get ready before you even jump into the game is to make sure your settings are in order. For those that have played the closed beta, you may have noticed that some of your settings have actually changed since then. On one hand, maybe that is to be expected because, well, it's a new build of the game, but on the other, it's the same account all linked beforehand, so you'd think that maybe some of this did end up transferring over, and for some, it did, but for others, not so much. So make sure you go in and check your settings to make sure they are still where you want, or so you can get them back to where you want them. Now, if you are a first-time player upcoming here, there's a few ones that I definitely think are important. Of course, all settings are subjective and tailored to your experience, so I can't give you definitive, here's what you should use for this, but things that I would recommend is making sure you adjust things like your button layout. Brawler's my go-to. That's the tactical button layout for COD by comparison. Just swaps that middle stick and your B or circle button. Aim assist settings, you can adjust the strength of this with this or turn it off if you don't want it at all. Aim response curve type, personally I go for the reverse S curve here in XDefiant. That's the COD comparison of the dynamic setting. Sensitivities, of course, all subjective. I can't recommend one for you, but I go a bit higher on the sensitivity settings to give a snap in terms of view aim, but then whenever I'm ADS, I have a little bit lower just so it has a slower pass over if I'm aiming down sight towards an enemy. So make sure you adjust all that kind of stuff accordingly and make sure you can test that out to make sure it's perfected, which we'll get to in a second. Secondly, whenever you're choosing weapons for in-game, you want to craft loadouts for your playstyle. Again, this is one that I can recommend some weapons and things like that, but in terms of how you want to play, that's all up to you. There's a lot of attachments that allow for quick movement, a lot of attachments that allow for insane recoil control, fire rate adjustments, all that kind of stuff, but it really comes down to what you want out of your gunfights and how you want to approach the gameplay experience. So you have 10 classes to work with. Everything as of right now is unlocked. Whether or not they lock this up and then go the route of unlocking things via rank, we don't quite know just yet, but as of the time of recording this, it is something that everything is unlocked for all players. So play around with it. There's a lot of weapons to play around with, a lot of attachments, and again, plenty of custom classes you can end up using to end up testing everything all out. Number 3 here, test out your settings and loadouts in the practice range. This is kind of the summation of number 1 and 2 here, but if I can be candid with you, this is what Call of Duty's firing range should have been. The practice zone for XDefiant is just embarrassingly good by comparison. This is truly a great tool to help warm up, practice as the name suggests, or just to test anything out for loadouts, settings, operators' abilities, and all. From a shooting gallery with a pop-up target practice, a range with varied levels of distance targets, both of which having designated shot details for each shot with a damage dealt, a spray pattern target that refreshes after a few seconds, an ability setup that allows for dummies to be either in stationary, shooting, running, or mid-abilities positions so as to get some as close to combat practice as possible, as well a shooting course that isn't a whole ton of much, but it's a fun little way to run a course and try out your sort of twitch accuracy. It's just truly remarkable to consider that this is all in a beta. Also, a lot of this was in the closed beta and even earlier play sessions in the insider sessions, while COD's fully polished offering with a full launch is just a dimly lit corridor with 3 dummies to shoot. That's it. So, I mean, I'll take the XDefiant one any day, but make sure you test out your settings and loadouts, utilize that and warm up here before jumping into matches. Number 4, finally getting into game here. Well, pacing is everything. It's entirely personal, but it's a very fast-paced game at its core because it is an arcade shooter. Twitch shooters to reward those that can snap with accuracy to those that can get in and out. It's not quite to the level of like Modern Warfare 2019 movement meta type stuff, but it's a very fast-paced game. But at the same time, sometimes you can get too overzealous, too sucked into zooming around the map, and I will absolutely say that I am incredibly guilty of this here. The matches that I don't do well in, it's because I'm just so sucked in on trying to chase red dots or trying to get into the action that I'll jump in, and a lot of the gunfights here that I experienced noticed here for the first day was that everything was a 1v2, 1v3, 1v4, sometimes not even kidding, a 1v5 situation where I'll take out 2-3 players sometimes, but there's always going to be that one more because I'm in the middle of the action for everything. So you can absolutely do that, but if you want to be successful, you want to go on kill streaks, play it a little slower. Make sure you don't jump into the middle of the map and everything that's going on around you. Stay to the outside a little bit. Pick off players one by one instead of rushing headfirst into the capture point, into the capture zones and everything that goes along with it. It is something that you can play that crazy and fast-paced, but might not always be the best situation for you. So a little bit of a mental game here going into it. Next up, the importance of accuracy is absolutely something that you need to know. Of course, there is predictive recoil with these weapons, so it is definitely nice that, reverting back to number 3 here, go back into that practice zone and test out those recoil patterns so you can go in and master them or mitigate them with whatever loadouts and attachments you want to put on your weapons. But accuracy is absolutely one of the biggest things here with this in terms of securing kills. The TTK can absolutely be slow if you're not hitting your shots, but for those that can hit consistent headshots, well, the headshot multipliers in XDefiant right now are nuts. So make sure you are accurate, make sure you're going for those chest and upper headshots, and practice where you can. Next up, beyond that, extending past the importance of accuracy, the importance of your weapon build is also insanely crucial. This might sound kind of self-explanatory, but it's something that truly kind of changed my game in some cases already. For reference, one of the big things that I ended up experiencing was I had a situation where I was playing with the ACR, and though nerfed, it's still insanely good for kill potential, but the build that I had defaulted to, it was almost feeling like the gun was almost misaligned in the optics, and that something, I don't know really how I could show that, but it was a feel thing, it just felt off. I would take shots and it would feel like I was constantly like 1 or 2 shots behind where the reticle should be. However, that really wasn't the case. It was just a matter of, despite thinking it was enough, it wasn't enough compensation for the recoil. The ACR recoil pattern is roughly about 45 degrees of an angle up and to the right. Consistent, and I'd say it's one of the more consistent patterns that deviates that hard. So I adjusted my setup, and sure, it wasn't as fast on reloads, movement speed, or other things like that, but compensating for vertical and horizontal recoil, well, it entirely mitigated that delayed feeling that I had felt with the ACR up until that point. So that's just a small example of how you can pick apart plenty of different things in builds, but just as a small frame of reference for how important a few attachments can be to weapon performance and feel, that's my anecdote. So double check your builds, make sure you end up having everything in order for how you want it to be, whether you want it for fast-paced mobility and action, or if you want it for something that can beam players at a distance with minimal recoil, make sure you end up adjusting it. Again, it is tailored to your specific playstyle, so I can't really give you one way or the other. And before we continue, real quickly, make sure you check out my friends over at G Fuel for 20% off all the time with code Espresso, but 30% off for the month of June on the tubs of Hype Sauce, Hibiscus Tea, MS Melon, and more, as well as starter kits. So if you haven't tried G Fuel before, now is as best a time as any with that starter kit discounted and those tubs. Can't go wrong with any of those. I've said it before, Hype Sauce is one of my personal favorites in terms of flavors. Today I end up having the Morbius Nectarine flavor, but yesterday and probably back to tomorrow I'll have Hype Sauce. So if you guys want to check those or others out, make sure you check the link in the description below and use code Espresso at checkout for 30% off your entire order. But said, next up, one of the big things to take into consideration here that you might not be used to if you've been playing a lot of Modern Warfare 2 is to watch the mini-map, because we actually have red dots on the mini-map as a classic arcade shooter would indicate and should have. You can absolutely chase if you would like, but honestly, one of the big things that I think that just really helps you out with is knowing that map knowledge, being able to understand where players may or may not be. If you're running towards red dots, of course you're going to have other engagements, but if not, well, that might be something that you can go for a relatively safe flank or something like that. And that leads me into number 8 here, because that then deals with knowing map flow. Stick to the outside if you really want to try and get around players. Going through the middle, of course, you'll end up having those gunfights, but there are a lot of flank routes for some maps, others not so much. But again, be aware of that dead space. Going back into number 7 here and watching that mini map, if you see where your team is, of course, probably not going to have a lot of players lurking around you if you see 2 or 3 teammates in that mini-map. But if you don't, just know you might be in enemy territory. And also, where those red dots may be coming from is a good indication for where the other team may be flowing in from. So just be aware of that kind of stuff, take it into consideration, and make sure you can stay alive as long as possible. Number 9, one thing that may or may not be an option for you is to party up. Initially speaking, this might be something that has a little bit of an asterisk right now, because earlier it was something that partying up was not working. Matchmaking matchmaking was a bit bugged. Hopefully by the time this video goes up and beyond, it will be fixed so that you can end up playing with friends, but having more than one set of eyes is incredibly helpful. Being able to get trades, being able to make the communication where players could be with your friends very easily, it's a world of a difference in terms of gameplay experience. You could absolutely be going through it as a solo player. Myself being a predominantly solo player, I know that feeling big time. But if you end up having a team of 2, 3, 4, well, you have callouts for mostly everybody if you can match up 1-to-1 with players. And if somebody sees 2 players, well, that might be 3 of 6 players, 4 of 6 players accounted for. So it's definitely something that is incredibly helpful, and as small of a tip as it is, makes a world of a difference. And then finally, the last thing that I'll recommend here is to try it out, try everything out on offer. Weapons, abilities, factions, maps, modes, all that kind of stuff, try it out, because right now it is free to play after all. You have absolutely nothing to lose, and honestly, going into the launch of the game as well, that's going to be free to play. So you don't have anything to lose, and who knows, maybe you find your next favorite arcade shooter here at this. Maybe it's a game that might look a little corny to you, it might not be your cup of tea, but if you jump in and try it out, okay, maybe that validates your thoughts and process behind it. But maybe it surprises you. Maybe it is something that hooks you in. And so therefore, you got nothing to lose other than maybe like a half hour to a couple of hours of game time if you don't like it at the very worst. So try it out, have some fun with it, and absolutely try everything on offer. Maybe it can be what you're looking for. But that said, that is some quick tips here for the XDefiant beta on how to do better and how to have a better time overall. So let me know your thoughts down below. Is there anything in particular you would add to this list? Anything that you would subtract? Whatever the case, feel free to drop your thoughts. But if you enjoyed the video, you found it at all insightful, do me a favor and drop a like on it. And if you're new to the channel, consider subscribing to stay updated with all things XDefiant here throughout the beta, Modern Warfare 2, and other FPS content upcoming. Love to have you in the community, but for now, thanks so much for watching. Mine has been Espresso. I'll see you later. Take care and peace.